Cassie Miller stood on the dusty gravel of the trailer park, her hands shaking as she looked at the mobile home she thought was finally hers. Just 24 hours ago, this spot felt like a dream come true for a single mom who had been through a total shit show lately. She met Rick Gentry right here after seeing his ad on Facebook Marketplace. He looked like a regular guy, and his wife, Tanya, seemed just as nice. They stood on the small wooden porch, talking about the future. Cassie reached into her bag and pulled out $2,000 in cash, mostly 20s and hundreds, and handed it over to Rick. It was every single penny she had saved to make sure her two kids wouldn't end up homeless. The handshake felt solid, like a real promise. Rick smiled and handed her a title document, telling her the place was all hers now. He seemed so kind, even telling her not to worry about the rent right away. Cassie felt a huge weight lift off her shoulders as she gripped the keys. She watched as Rick and Tanya started moving their things, thinking she had finally caught a break in life. She didn't notice the way Rick kept looking at his phone or how Tanya avoided eye contact while they packed. To Cassie, that handshake was the start of a new life, but to the couple in the white dress shirt and the shadows of the trailer, it was just a successful shit show of a scam they thought would go completely unnoticed. The next day, the feeling of relief started to turn into a strange worry. Rick had told Cassie that she didn't need to worry about the rent or talking to the office until the end of the month. He said he was just trying to be a nice guy because he knew how hard it was for a single mom with two kids. At first, Cassie really believed him. She even told herself that she was lucky to find such a kind person in such a tough world. But something felt off. Rick seemed way too eager for her to stay away from the park management, and he was moving his own things out with a speed that looked more like running away than just moving. Rick kept insisting that they had open titles and that the park office already knew everything was fine. He used his nice guy act like a shield, constantly reminding Cassie that he was doing her a huge favor by letting her save money on rent. This was his trap. By acting like a friend, he hoped Cassie wouldn't ask too many questions or go to the office to check the paperwork. He needed her to stay quiet just long enough for him and Tanya to get across the state line and disappear with her $2,000. Cassie wanted to trust him, but that nagging feeling in her gut wouldn't go away. She realized that if she waited until the end of the month like Rick wanted, she might find herself locked out of a home she never actually owned. Cassie decided she couldn't wait any longer. Something about the way Rick and Tanya were throwing things into their truck made her feel like they were about to vanish. She drove over to the Oakwoods leasing office, her heart pounding against her ribs. When she got inside, she met the property manager and showed her the title Rick had given her. Cassie explained that she was the new owner and just wanted to make sure everything was ready for her to move in. The manager's face went pale as she looked at the paperwork. "Oh, honey," she said softly, "he's been trying to scam people with his trailer for a while." The bombshell hit Cassie like a physical blow. The manager explained that Rick didn't have any right to sell the home. He wasn't the legal owner, and even worse, he owed the park over $5,000 in back rent and fees. The nice guy who was helping her save money was actually a man drowning in debt, trying to steal her $2,000 before the park could kick him out. Cassie felt sick to her stomach. She realized that the money she had worked so hard for was likely already gone, and the home she bought was nothing more than a crime scene. As the sun began to dip low over the trailer park, casting long, orange shadows across the gravel, the sense of urgency reached a breaking point. Cassie stood by the white pickup truck, her eyes fixed on the front door of the mobile home. She could see Rick and Tanya through the windows, moving like shadows as they hauled boxes and bags toward the back of the house. They weren't just moving, they were scrubbing their presence from the lot. The U-Haul trailer sat half-loaded, a silent witness to their plan to disappear into the night before anyone realized the $2,000 sale was a total sham. Every time a car drove slowly down the narrow street, Cassie's heart jumped, hoping it was the police. She knew that if they didn't arrive soon, the white dress shirt on the porch and the woman hiding in the living room would be gone, leaving her with nothing but a forged piece of paper and two kids with nowhere to sleep. The realization that they were packing to flee to another state, maybe Indiana or Florida, made the air feel heavy. When the distant sound of a siren finally cut through the quiet evening air, Cassie let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for hours. The Samaritans were almost out of time, and the Bodycam was about to start rolling on their final act. The crackle of the police radio broke the tense silence as Officer Keeper's cruiser pulled into the lot. The Bodycam clicked on, its fisheye lens capturing the late afternoon sun glinting off the white pickup truck and the half-loaded U-Haul. Cassie didn't wait. She hurried toward the officer, her face a mask of desperation. "You want to start at the beginning?" Keeper asked, his voice calm but firm. Cassie pointed toward the trailer, her hands shaking as she spilled the story of the $2,000 cash handshake and the nice guy act that turned out to be a trap. Officer Keeper listened, his eyes moving from the distraught mother to the man in the white dress shirt watching them from the porch. The camera captured every detail, the overgrown grass, the cluttered lot, and the suspicious movements of the couple inside the home. Rick Gentry stood his ground, trying to look like a confused homeowner, but the body cam recorded the way his eyes darted toward the exit. This wasn't a friendly visit. It was the start of a formal investigation. The red recording light on Keeper's chest was a silent warning that every word spoken from here on out would be used to build a case. The Samaritan act was officially over, and the truth was about to be laid bare under the unblinking eye of the law. Officer Keeper listened intently as Cassie dropped another piece of troubling news. This wasn't just a case of missing money. It was a situation that had already turned violent. Cassie gave the officer a heads-up about an altercation that had happened just before he arrived. Her stepdad had come over earlier to try and talk sense into Rick, but the conversation had ended instantly in a clash. According to Cassie, the tension had exploded so quickly that a table was flipped over during the argument. Rick hadn't just used words to defend himself. He had reportedly pulled out a knife on her stepdad. Her stepdad, feeling threatened, had pulled out his own knife in response, telling Rick, "I have one too." Though the immediate danger had passed, the record of this fight hung heavy in the air. It showed that Rick was desperate and willing to use a weapon to keep his scam from falling apart. Officer Keeper made a mental note of the violence as he looked toward the trailer. He knew he wasn't just dealing with a smooth-talking thief, but someone who was backed into a corner and potentially dangerous. Officer Keeper walked up to the porch where Rick Gentry stood waiting. Rick's face was tense, but he tried to act like everything was normal. When the officer asked about the sale, Rick immediately jumped into his first big lie. He claimed that he and Tanya had sold the trailer to Cassie, but he insisted they didn't need to put the title in their own names first. He told the officer that the trailer court told them they didn't have to register it or get a new title as long as they transferred the taxes. Rick kept using the term open title as an excuse. He argued that since they bought the trailer a year ago and never registered it, it was perfectly fine to just hand over the old owner's paper to Cassie. He even compared it to a car, though his logic was confusing and made very little sense to the officer. Rick was trying to make a criminal act sound like a simple mistake or a special rule for mobile homes. He stood there in his white shirt, acting like a victim of a misunderstanding, but the open title was really just his way of making sure his name was never legally connected to the property he was trying to sell. Officer Keeper realized that Rick's story didn't match the names on the paper. He took the title and looked at the name of the original owner, a man who wasn't at the trailer park that day. To get to the bottom of the mystery, the police decided to try and call the number Rick had given Cassie for this owner. Rick claimed he knew the guy and had his number saved, but the first call Cassie made to that person was a total disaster. The man on the other end seemed confused and had no idea what address she was talking about. When Cassie asked for his middle name, the line went dead silent. The officer tried to verify the contact information himself. He knew that if this original owner was a real person who had actually sold the home to Rick, they would be able to confirm the story. But every time the police pushed for more details, the trail went cold. Rick kept saying he had the guy on Facebook or that his bank could prove the sale, but he never actually produced a real person. The ghost owner was becoming a huge red flag for Officer Keeper. It looked like the person on the title was just a name being used to hide the fact that Rick and Tanya were the ones pulling all the strings. As Officer Keeper continued his investigation, Rick tried to explain why the title had stayed in a safe for so long instead of being registered. He claimed that when he originally bought the trailer, he was told by the previous owner that he didn't need to put the title in his name right away. To back up his story, Rick told a complicated tale about a safe deposit box. He said the document had been locked away safely for a year, untouched and protected, which is why it still looked so clean. Rick insisted that the title was signed and ready from the moment he got it a year ago. He argued that he only handed it over to Cassie yesterday because he finally found a buyer. However, his story about the safe deposit box started to sound like a tall tale to the officer. If the paper had been sitting in a box for an entire year, certain things shouldn't have looked so new. Rick was trying to use the idea of a safe to prove he was a responsible owner, but the more he talked about the history of the document, the more suspicious Officer Keeper became. The officer knew that real legal documents don't just sit open in safes for years without someone breaking the law. Officer Keeper turned his attention to a major hole in the story. Cassie had already told him that she stood right on the porch and watched through the living room window as the paperwork was being handled. She was very clear about what she saw. It wasn't a man signing that title a year ago. She told the officer that she personally witnessed Tanya, the girlfriend, pick up a pen and sign a name that wasn't hers just yesterday. This was the shadow signature. While Rick was busy talking about safes and old owners, Cassie pointed directly at Tanya as the person who actually put the ink on the paper. Even though Rick tried to say that Tanya only dated the document because it was left open, Cassie didn't budge from her story. She knew what she saw. To her, it was a clear act of forgery done right in front of her eyes. Officer Keeper looked from Cassie's honest face back to Rick, who was starting to look a little less confident. The officer knew that if a person signs someone else's name to a legal document, it doesn't matter what excuses they have. It is a crime. Officer Keeper took the title from Rick and looked at it very closely under the bright daylight. He noticed something that made Rick's story about the safe deposit box fall apart completely. The signature and the date on the paper looked incredibly fresh, as if the ink had barely dried. Even more suspicious was the color and the way the pen moved on the paper. The officer looked over at the porch and spotted a pen sitting right there. He compared the ink from that pen to the writing on the title. "It looks like the same penmanship," Keeper said, pointing to the document. "It is the exact same pen." He challenged Rick, asking how a title signed a whole year ago could possibly have ink that matched a pen sitting on the porch today so perfectly. This was the forensic evidence the officer needed. It proved that the old signature was actually brand new, created just minutes before the police arrived. Rick tried to keep lying, but the matching ink told a story of a very recent forgery that he couldn't explain away. The investigation moved into the digital world as Officer Keeper looked at the phone numbers Rick had given to Cassie. He started to realize that the original owner she was texting might not be a man at all. Cassie showed the officer her phone, pointing out the messages from a person who claimed to be the owner's wife. This person had been texting Cassie to tell her that the sale was okay and that everything was legal. Officer Keeper did a quick search of that specific phone number. A moment later, a photo popped up on the screen. It wasn't a stranger or a distant owner. It was a picture of Tanya Ray. This was the digital double. The couple had been using Tanya's own phone to pretend to be someone else, tricking Cassie into thinking the sale was verified by a third party. Seeing Tanya's face linked to the fake texts was the final proof that the whole setup was a trap. Rick and Tanya weren't just selling a trailer they didn't own. They were creating fake people to help them steal Cassie's money. With this discovery, the web of lies was finally fully unraveled. While Rick continued to argue on the porch, another officer was busy talking to the people who really ran the park. They needed to hear the final word from the Oakwoods management office. The officer confirmed everything Cassie had feared. The management stated clearly that Rick had no authority to sell the trailer to anyone. Not only did he not legally own the home in the park's records, but he also owed thousands of dollars in back fees that had never been paid. The office explained that even if Rick had a piece of paper, the sale was invalid because he was in violation of his lease and owed a massive debt. This was the final piece of the puzzle. The police now had proof from the property owners themselves that the $2,000 sale was a total lie. Rick's claims that the office told him he could sell it were proven to be false. The The Samaritan act was dead, and the legal reality had finally set in. Officer Keeper had heard enough. Between the fresh ink on the title, the fake phone numbers, and the confirmation from the park office, the case was clear. He walked back to the porch and looked at Rick Gentry, who was still trying to talk his way out of trouble. "All right, Brian, or Rick, go ahead and get off the phone for me," Keeper said firmly. Rick looked confused and asked, "For what?" The officer didn't hesitate. "You're going to be under arrest." As Officer Keeper grabbed Rick's arms to put them behind his back, Rick's arrogant attitude finally started to crack. He began to panic, shouting, "What am I being arrested for?" The officer told him he was being charged with theft by deception for the $2,000 he took from Cassie. Rick's hubris, his overconfidence, disappeared instantly. He started making desperate excuses, claiming he would give the money back tomorrow when his bank opened. He kept repeating that he had bought the trailer and didn't understand why he was going to jail. But the handcuffs clicked shut, ending his power over the situation. His plan to stay unnoticed had failed, and no amount of talking could change the fact that he was now in police custody. The tension on the porch stayed high as Officer Keeper turned his attention to Tanya Ray. Rick was already in handcuffs, but the investigation had shown that Tanya was just as involved in the scam. Cassie had witnessed her signing the fake name on the title, and the digital evidence proved she was the one posing as the owner's wife in the text messages. "All right, go ahead and stand up for us," the officer told Tanya, asking her to put her hands behind her back. Rick immediately started shouting, trying to protect her by yelling, "She didn't do nothing." He was desperate to keep his partner out of trouble, but the evidence was too strong. Tanya was taken into custody and charged with both theft by deception and forgery. As she was led away from the trailer toward the patrol car, the quiet life they had tried to build on lies officially ended. Rick's final pleas to speak with his wife were ignored as the officers focused on securing the scene. The couple who thought they could trick a single mother and vanish into another state were now both facing the consequences of their actions together. As the flashing blue and red lights of the police cruisers illuminated the trailer park, the chaotic scene finally began to settle. Rick Gentry and Tanya Ray sat in the back of separate patrol cars, their belongings still half-packed in the U-Haul that would now never leave the lot. The scam they had carefully constructed, built on forged signatures, fake phone numbers, and a nice guy act, had completely collapsed under the pressure of Officer Keeper's investigation. Cassie Miller stood by her car, her 2 children tucked safely inside, watching as the people who tried to steal her future were driven away. While her $2,000 was still tied up in the investigation, the truth had been officially recorded in a police report, just as the state's attorney had required. Rick was charged with theft by deception, while Tanya faced charges for both theft by deception and forgery for her role in signing the false documents. Justice was served because Cassie refused to stay silent, and the police followed the trail of fresh ink and digital lies. The scam that was supposed to go unnoticed ended with a click of handcuffs, proving that in this park, no one was going to get away with preying on a family in need.